asleep in a moment. The young gunner shook his head admiringly and smiled at Mallory. "Worried to hell, isn't he, sir?" Mallory laughed and watched the boy disappear forward into the control cabin. He sipped his coffee slowly, looked again at the sleeping figure across the passage. The blissful unconcern was magnificent. Corporal Dusty Miller of the United States, and more recently of the Long-Range Desert Force, would be a good man to have around. He looked round at the others and nodded to himself in satisfaction. They would all be good men to have around. 18 months in Crete had developed in him an unerring sense for assessing a man's capacity for survival in the peculiar kind of irregular warfare in which he himself had been so long engaged. Offhand, he'd have taken long odds on the capacity of these four to survive. In the matter of picking an outstanding team, Captain Jensen, he reckoned, had done him proud. He didn't know them all yet, not personally, but he was intimately acquainted with the exhaustive dossier that Jensen held on each one of them. These were reassuring, to say the least. Or was there perhaps a slight question mark against Stevens? Mallory wondered, looking across the passage at the fair-haired, boyish figure, gazing out eagerly beneath the gleaming white wing of the Sunderland. Lieutenant Andy Stevens, RNVR, had been chosen for this assignment for 3 reasons. He would navigate the craft that was to take them to Navarone. He was a first-class alpinist, with several outstanding climbs to his record. And, the product of the classical side of a red-brick university, he was an almost fanatical Philhellene, fluent in both ancient and modern Greek, and had spent his last 2 long vacations before the war as a tourist courier in Athens. But he was young, absurdly young, Mallory thought as he looked at him, and youth could be dangerous. Too often in that island guerrilla warfare it had been fatal. The enthusiasm, the fire, the zeal of youth was not enough. Rather, it was too much, a positive handicap. This was not a war of bugle calls and roaring engines and magnificent defiance in the clamour of battle. This was a war of patience and endurance and stability, of cunning and craft and stealth, and these were not commonly the attributes of youth. But he looked as if he might learn fast. Mallory stole another glance at Miller. Dusty Miller, he decided, had learnt it all a long, long time ago. Dusty Miller on a white charger, the bugle to his lips? No, his mind just refused to encompass the incongruity of it. He just didn't look like Sir Lancelot. He just looked as if he'd been around for a long, long time, and had no illusions left. Corporal Miller had in fact been around for exactly 40 years. By birth a Californian, by descent 3 parts Irish and 1 part Central European, he had lived and fought and adventured more in the previous quarter of a century than most men would in a dozen lifetimes. Silver miner in Nevada, tunneler in Canada, an oil fire shooter all over the globe. He had been in Saudi Arabia when Hitler attacked Poland. One of his more remote maternal ancestors, sometime around the turn of the century, had lived in Warsaw. But that had been affront enough for Miller's Irish blood. He had taken the first available plane to Britain and lied his way into the Air Force, where, to his immense disgust, and because of his age, he was relegated to the rear turret of a Wellington. His first operational flight had been his last. Within 10 minutes of taking off from the Menidi airfield outside Athens, on a January night in 1941, engine failure had brought them to an ignominious, though well-cushioned end in a paddy field, some miles northwest of the city. The rest of the winter he had spent seething with rage in a cookhouse back in Menidi. At the beginning of April, he resigned from the Air Force without telling anyone, and was making his way north towards the fight.